Lesson 94. Migration to Al-Madinah. The hijrah of Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, and his companion Abu Bakr al-Siddiq. When disbelievers of Quraysh knew that Allah's Prophet, peace be upon him, had gathered followers and supporters from other tribes, and when they saw the migration of his companions towards those supporters who pledged their allegiance to defend him to the death, their leaders and chiefs gathered in Dar al-Nadwa, a house built by Qusay ibn Kilab, where they used to meet when important matters faced them. They gathered to discuss what to do with the Prophet, peace be upon him. One of them said, "Let us chain him up in prison until he dies." Another said, "Expel him and exile him from our land." One of their chiefs said, "Neither are good ideas, because if we imprison him, the news will spread and his companions will come and rescue him. And if we exile him, we could not ensure that we may win the hearts of those to whom he resorts by his sweet words and good speech. They may follow him and he will come back to you with them." The tyrant Abu Jahl said, "I say that we choose a strong young man from each tribe, then those young men would strike him as if they were one man, so that his blood will be scattered among all tribes, and Banu Manaf cannot fight all tribes." They liked this idea, and they all agreed and appointed the young men and fixed the night upon which they would carry out this mission. But Allah informed his Prophet, peace be upon him, what his enemies intended to do, and gave him permission to emigrate to Yathrib, Al-Madinah. So he went to Abu Bakr, told him the news, and Abu Bakr was permitted to accompany him. They agreed to prepare the 2 camels which Abu Bakr had arranged for this trip. They chose a guide to lead them to the shortest route, and they appointed the same night which Quraysh had chosen. On that night, the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked his cousin Ali ibn Abu Talib to sleep in his bed and to use his cover, so that no one would know that the Prophet had left his home. Then he went out while the Qurayshi men were gathering at his door, and he was reading Surah Yasin. The moment he approached them, he was reading, "We enveloped them so they do not behold the truth." He repeated it several times until Allah made them fall asleep, so they lost their perception and could neither see nor feel him. He went to Abu Bakr's house, and they went out together through an opening in the rear of the house. They went southward out of Mecca towards Mount Thawr and entered its cave. The Qurayshi men waited for the Prophet, peace be upon him, to come out until the morning. When Quraysh discovered that their young men were surrounding Ali ibn Abu Talib and not Muhammad, peace be upon him, their tempers flared up and they were confused. They then sent their men to pursue him and to search in all directions. They promised a reward of 100 camels to the one who would bring him back. So trackers went after the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Abu Bakr. Some of them reached the small cave, so that if any of them had paid a little attention, he would have seen who was there. Abu Bakr was very sad, thinking that they would find them. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Grieve not, surely Allah is with us." Yet Allah diverted their sight and awareness from them, so that they did not see inside the cave. On the contrary, their evil leader, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, assured them that they could not have been hiding there because of a spider web and nesting pigeons at its entrance. The Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions stayed in the cave for 3 nights, until Quraysh stopped searching for them. Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr used to spend the night with them, and go to Quraysh in the morning so he could listen to their reports about the Prophet and his companion, then return to them each night with what he had heard. Asma bint Abu Bakr brought them food each night. Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr commanded his slave to graze the cattle leading up to and around the cave to erase his and Asma's footprints. On the morning of the third night spent in the cave, which was the first Monday of Rabi al-Awwal in the year of Hijrah, Amir ibn Fuhayra, Abu Bakr's servant, brought them 2 riding camels, together with Abdullah ibn Urayqit, whom they hired to guide them. This was 53 years after the birth of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and 13 years after his prophethood. They rode, and Abu Bakr asked Amir ibn Fuhayra to follow and serve them. The guide led them south of Makkah, then north along the seashore. While they were on their way, Suraqa ibn Malik followed them after he had heard somebody saying in one of Quraysh's assemblies, "I have seen some figures along the seashore. I think they were Muhammad and his companions." When he approached them, his horse stumbled and he fell down. He got up and rode again until he heard the Prophet reciting the Quran. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was not turning round, while Abu Bakr was repeatedly turning round to survey. The feet of Suraqa's horse sank into the sand and he fell down again. The horse could not get up until Suraqa asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, for help, especially when he saw the dust rising from the ground under the horse's hooves. So he was very frightened and asked for help. The Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions stopped, and he came and offered supplies to them. But they did not accept any. Instead, they said, "Keep the matter secret." He asked them for a letter of protection, so Abu Bakr wrote it according to the Prophet's instructions, and Suraqa went back from where he came, keeping the secret. Suraqa told Abu Jahl about it later. Suraqa embraced Islam on the day of the conquest of Makkah, and he was a very good Muslim. The Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companion continued their trip until they reached Quba, on the outskirts of Al-Madinah, on Monday the 12th of the month of Rabi al-Awwal. The Prophet stayed at Banu Amr ibn Auf, and Abu Bakr stayed at As-Sunh, a suburb of Al-Madinah, at Kharija ibn Said. The Prophet stayed in Quba for several nights, during which he built the mosque described in the Holy Quran as a mosque that was founded on piety from the first day. The Prophet prayed in it with al-Muhajirin, immigrants, the name given to the Muslims of Makkah who emigrated to Al-Madinah, and al-Ansar, supporters, the name given to the new Muslims of Al-Madinah because they gave refuge to the Prophet, peace be upon him. Ali ibn Abu Talib followed the Prophet, peace be upon him, to Quba after he had stayed in Makkah several days to deliver back to their owners what the Prophet had held in trust. His coming, peace be upon him, to Al-Madinah. The people of Al-Madinah, upon hearing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was on his way to them, would come out daily from Al-Madinah, eagerly awaiting his arrival. They would wait until they felt the unbearable noon heat that would force them to return to the shade of their homes. One day, having returned to their homes, they heard someone calling at the top of his voice, "O you Arabs, he for whom you have been eagerly waiting has come." So they went back to welcome the Prophet, peace be upon him, at the back of Al-Harra, land on the outskirts of Al-Madinah, with black stones before his arrival to Quba. Later, the Prophet, peace be upon him, left Quba for Al-Madinah, surrounded by the happy Ansar who were carrying their swords to defend him. Some were walking, while others were riding. They competed to hold his camel's reins, since every one of them wanted to receive him at his own home. The young boys and girls, men and women also chanted, "The full moon has shone upon us. From beyond the farewell pathways, we must be thankful whenever someone calls us to Allah. O Messenger, to us you have come with a decree that will be obeyed." This was on Friday, and when it was time for the prayer, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was in the quarters of Banu Salim ibn Auf. So he came out and prayed. This was the very first Friday prayer performed by the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it was on that date that it became obligatory, according to the most famous narrations. The Prophet, peace be upon him, then rode his camel again and went on, and whenever he passed by one of the houses of the Ansar, they would plead with him to stay at their place, taking his camel's rein, and he would say to them, "Leave her, the she-camel, she has been commanded." The camel continued to walk until it came to the property of Banu Adi ibn Najjar, the maternal uncles of the Prophet, peace be upon him. There he knelt down in front of the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. The Prophet, peace be upon him, then said, "This is where we will stay, inshallah." Thus he stayed at the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. He remained there for a few months until he was able to buy the land where his camel knelt down, and there he built his mosque. He built the mosque using adobe and made it slightly higher than a man's height. The two door frames were made of stones, the roof was made of dry palm leaves, while the columns were made of the trunks of palm trees. The Prophet, peace be upon him, participated himself in the building of the mosque to encourage everyone to participate in the work. Nearby he built 2 rooms for his only wives at that time, Aisha and Sauda. More rooms were added later whenever he married a new wife. After a few days he sent for his family, and Abu Bakr also sent out for his own. So Sauda, the wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his 2 daughters Fatima and Kulthum arrived, but his other daughter Zainab was prevented by her husband Abul As ibn Rubay from emigrating. Meanwhile, Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr also brought his stepmother and his 2 sisters, Aisha and Asma. Asma was the wife of Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, and she was pregnant with her son Abdullah, who would become the first newborn of Al-Muhajirin to be born in Al-Madinah. The Muhajirin then followed the Prophet, peace be upon him, to Al-Madinah, and only a few Muslims remained in Mecca, as they could not afford to emigrate. When the emigration to Al-Madinah was completed, the Ansar competed among themselves to host the Muhajirin. Each wanted the largest share, so they resorted to draw lots as to who would host whom. The Prophet, peace be upon him, wanted to strengthen the ties between them even further, so he declared bonds of brotherhood between each one of the Al-Ansar and his guest of Al-Muhajirin. The Ansar always prioritized the Muhajirin even before themselves, and this was the ultimate level of brotherhood for the sake of Allah.